Hello, everyone. I just started recording the webinar, so we are going to get started. This webinar is going to focus on building successful fundraising campaigns, and we are so fortunate to have a panel of partners with us today. So we have Ms. Katherine Duncan, the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Jed Foundation, and then Ms. Courtney McKeon, the Vice President of a National Stigma Initiative at Shatterproof, and Mr. Patrick Reedy, the Chief Development Officer at Shatterproof. And this panel is moderated by Dr. Jim McDonough, the AVP for Corporate and Foundation Relations at Huntsman Mental Health Foundation. So a really great group. Just a quick housekeeping is all questions will be done through Q&A. So if you have a question, type it in there and we will get to it as quickly as we can. And if we can't get to it, I'm sure that the panelists can maybe answer some emails afterwards or be available to some extent. So first, we'll have 25 minutes from the Jed Foundation, including Q&A, and then 25 minutes from Shatterproof, also including Q&A. So as a question pops into your mind, just type it in the Q&A box and we'll get to it in the order that they're written. So without further ado, Jim, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and good afternoon or good morning to everyone, no matter where you are. As Rachel said, I'm Jim McDonough, fairly new to the Huntsman Mental Health Foundation. I'm actually in my second month, but it's a pleasure to kind of get a chance to kind of host a webinar for the Financial Strategies Committee associated with the grand challenge of stopping stigma together. So I'm super pumped about the agenda we've put together today. There's some very good friends that you'll hear more of in a moment. I just want to take a second to kind of just set the scene for how we've structured the day. We have about an hour together. We hope to keep it very conversational. Both our partners, the Jed Foundation and Shatterproof, have some interesting use case discussions to kind of highlight for you around various fundraising strategies, the successes, the things we wouldn't do again, the things that worked so well that you should know deeply about them, and really just encouraging each of you in the background to jot down a few notes, use the chat for questions, and Rachel will get to them. My hope is that at the end of the hour together, you've had a chance to kind of pick up on one or two tidbits associated with your responsibilities. I know every nonprofit is different. They come in all shapes and sizes, but the material that we've coordinated across the partnerships, we think is highly relevant to each of you. And if you gain one or two things from today, then we've done our job. And we look forward to kind of working together as partners in the grand challenge going forward. This is a decade-long effort to kind of change the trajectory of mental health care in America today. I can think of nothing more important and nothing more personal to many of us than to kind of sink our teeth into the next 10 years of a relationship together to try to bring about really significant transformative change in the way we tackle stigma, the way that we alter care-seeking behaviors, and importantly, the way we all work together collectively to advance this cause. So we're going to begin this afternoon with our good friend Katherine from the Jed Foundation. And I had the pleasure of joining Jed last night for their annual gala here in New York City. And I just want to say publicly again to Katherine, job well done. It was a remarkable evening. I'm sure Jed is pleased with the results, but it was just such a really uplifting opportunity to kind of hear first-person accounts and then the organization's efforts to kind of go the extra mile to do what you do. So I'm going to kick it over to Katherine. I'll drop to mute, but please, everyone, just join me in welcoming Katherine Duncan from the Jed Foundation. Katherine.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us last night. And it was our honor to honor the Huntsman family. So it was a great night all the way around. So as Jim said, I'm Katherine Duncan. I'm Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Jed Foundation. And we just wanted to thank the Huntsman Mental Health Foundation for inviting us to be part of this conversation. We think this is a really important topic, so are very happy to be here. By way of introduction, I'll just sort of share a little bit about the Jed Foundation. We are a national nonprofit that protects emotional health and prevents suicide for teens and young adults. The organization was founded in 2000 by Phil and Donna Satow, who lost their youngest son, Jed, to suicide while he was in college. And at that time, there was no uniform model for preventing suicide in schools, and mental health was frequently overlooked due to shame, secrecy, and stigma that so often surrounds mental health challenges. And as a result of their personal experiences, the SATAs created a suicide prevention blueprint to help students navigate emotional challenges in high school and college and enter young adulthood with the skills and support needed to thrive. So 23 years later, today, our focus areas include helping schools strengthen their mental health and suicide prevention programs, policies, and systems, equipping young people with the skills and knowledge to help themselves and each other, and mobilizing communities by providing education, training, tools to families, friends, media, policymakers, and others around these issues. While tremendous progress has been made in combating mental health stigma, we believe this continues to be an important issue for organizations to tackle. So we're really happy to be here today and share what we've learned, and I will say are still learning about raising funds to support projects and campaigns that promote more open and honest dialogue around mental health. At Jed, this goal is integrated into all of our work. So I thought I would just share a few examples of how we've approached it both programmatically and then the corresponding fundraising tactics we've used. So I'll start by talking about Seize the Awkward, which is a major anti-stigma campaign that Jed launched in 2018 in partnership with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and Ad Council. And the campaign was predicated on research that Jed did that showed that young people who are struggling with mental health issues are more likely to turn to a peer for support than an adult. So encouraging youth to have these conversations can be a really important first step in identifying youth who are struggling and helping to connect them with care when it's needed. While we were really excited about this insight and the potential impact of a messaging campaign around it, we were also mindful that in order to be successful in changing long-term and deeply embedded attitudes and behaviors, a campaign would need to be implemented over the long term and at scale, which can, of course, have financial implications. So Jed made a few early and important decisions. The first is we decided we wanted to bring on a partner to do this work with us, and we asked the AFSAP if they would join us in this effort, and we're thrilled that they agreed. And by partnering with them, it's had many benefits for the campaign itself in terms of strengthening the messaging and amplifying the messaging that we create. And then it has also given us a partner to split the costs of producing an ambitious, high-impact campaign. So it's been both helpful to us programmatically and then financially. And the other decision that we made quickly is that understanding this was going to need to be long-term, we decided that we could not make our participation in the campaign dependent on restricted gifts and grants, because that can vary by year. So we made the decision that we were committed to funding it through unrestricted gifts and grants as needed throughout the duration of it. At Jed, the primary ways that we generate unrestricted funding is through our annual gala, which as Jim mentioned was last night. It's a huge event for us. And then also through our small gift program, which at Jed we define as gifts at the $1,000 level and below, and we invest heavily in different, outreach and ways to engage with donors at that level. And then those funds give our leadership team discretion in terms of deciding how they want to reinvest those dollars. And so this program, Seize the Awkward, is a recipient of those funds. While we have received some restricted funding to support Seize the Awkward over the years from individual donors, we have not yet had success in securing grants from corporations or foundations to underwrite this work, despite our attempt. So we have attempted it and we will continue to attempt it, but that has been a challenge. And as we've sort of reflected, and so it's been a challenge, and as I said, it's not a challenge that is coming as a surprise to us exactly, but that is what we have found. And as we have thought about, what are the lessons, one thing that occurs to us is some of the features of a messaging campaign that make it successful in changing the attitudes and behaviors. So being implemented over a very long period of time can also make it a challenging fit for shorter term gifts and grants for funders who give in those kinds of increments and time periods. So the fact that these campaigns do need to be very long-term in nature. Many funders are looking to have an impact in a shorter time horizon. And also that on the impact side, we are generating the impact data as we go. And we're thrilled to report that the longer the campaign has been implemented, the stronger the impact data in terms of the attitudes and behaviors that are shifting is becoming, but we are building that in real time. And of course, as anyone who's done a proposal knows, that those are questions that are asked, at day one of what do you expect the impacts to be and how will you measure them? And sometimes the time that they want reporting on that, we're just not there yet with this campaign. So those are sort of our lessons. We were not expecting this, and we have managed around it. And so we believe very much in this program, but that's sort of what we're learning on the fundraising side for this. And whether or not that will continue to be the case over the long term is to be determined. So again, this started in 2018. We are committed to doing this for a very long period of time. And we are also, by partnering with the Ad Council, they do an excellent job of sharing reach and impact data. And Jed is also building its capacity to further refine the impact measures and further go deeper still in gathering that information. And as we do, it may change what funders are a good fit for the program, but that's sort of what we're learning today. So another example of how Jed approaches stigma reduction is by sharing personal stories from both influential and everyday people about their experiences with mental health challenges. So through an initiative called Jed Voices, we record intimate conversations with leading cultural creators, including musicians, athletes, and others about what mental health means to them. And then we also have a related but separate program called Jed Storytelling, through which we train everyday people to tell their mental health stories in a safe and supportive environment, like a storytelling event or that kind of thing. And for these two programs, we have had a lot of success in getting restricted gifts and grants that underwrite those programs from corporate partners, individual funders, and family foundations specifically. And in those gifts and grants, a funder will give us funding for a specific video series or a specific training program to a certain group of people, or that will be implemented during a certain period. And so, as we've reflected, the goals of it in some ways overlap with the goals of Seize the Awkward, but we are having success with a different funder type for this project. And as we've reflected on, the difference, our sense is that using lived experience and storytelling as a framing mechanism through which we address stigma does really resonate with some of our funders, with specific donors who believe in and understand the power of storytelling and changing attitudes and behaviors, and are willing to invest in this program. And also, likely the fact that it can be done in different increments. Like there are smaller, it could be a four video series, or a training program has also helped make it approachable to many. So that is another example. And then the final example I'll just share before pause for question is we do a lot of work with corporations, different partnerships, and sort of under the cause marketing umbrella, where we're really working with a corporation that does a lot of messaging with teens and young adults, which is our demographic, and helping them hone their messaging to their constituents, to their customers, to their community, that sends out messages that are protective of mental health and supportive, and sharing resources and building skills, and helping them use their channels, their platform, their voice to message in a really powerful way on this issue, which again, we think is really important in reducing stigma. And by virtue of these being companies, the partnerships are formed in different ways. Sometimes they are supporting perhaps our school program, but we join them in doing messaging work. Sometimes they fund us to create resources. We co-develop resources, which then they use through their channels to disseminate. So there's a variety, the gifts and grants that come in through those kinds of partnerships varies in terms of what projects or work they underwrite at Jed, but we're working with them to help them use their, as I said, their voice, their channel to, we think, again, send these really important messages that ultimately normalize these conversations. So those are just three. I mean, again, this is really integrated into all of our work that we do. So it comes up in a variety of ways, but those are, in terms of the anti-stigma piece specifically, those are three ways that we are currently approaching it.
Yeah, thank you, Katherine. And while folks are warming up questions, I'll just riff a little bit on everything you just kind of provided for our audience. One is the creative nature of using unrestricted funding as, I'll refer to it as a line of credit to float your ability to kind of carry the campaign while you develop other resources. That's an interesting use in the nonprofit, I think, community. And depending upon your organization, is 23 years old, if I have the number correct. So you have this ability to kind of look in your rearview mirror at previous campaigns and be creative throughout. And I think we all understand this only comes about when we build a quilt of resources from the various sources that are out there. But the use of that unrestricted funding and being an organization that has the courage to commit it to, putting money out the door rather than taking care of itself. That's an interesting angle on the use of unrestricted funding. And then if you had to kind of, I think this is for everyone, if you had to really think about why is it difficult to attract grant-based funding for initiatives, what's some of the discussion you've had as a team around what makes this so hard?
Well, I think it varies. And I think as part of the context, Jed has obviously had a lot of success with fundraising for different initiatives. I think the campaigns specifically, again, like I said, I think it's by design. These are intended to be campaigns. I mean, if you look at some of like the most high impact campaigns, whether it's Friends Don't Let Friends Drink and Drive or some of these different ones, they went on for some, more than decades. I mean, they were really long term, and they have had huge impacts in defining what a friend does, which is, what our aspiration around Seize the Awkward. It's really kind of redefining what a normal conversation with friends could be like. They're very long term. And so I think just for many funders, I mean, again, we don't know, but this is our assumption, is that part of it is the long-term horizon of it. And the other part of it is the impact data, as I think everyone knows. I mean, being able to report on achieved impact or expected impact, and sometimes wanting that measures, not being willing to wait 10 years to see what those measures are, but wanting it in real time. It's a challenge. So beyond that, I think there's a lot of support for the campaign. And I do think as the longer the campaign progresses, the stronger the data will be. And again, like that may shift the model in terms of who will invest in it. But we continue to send out the proposals. So, these things could, we're not waiting to achieve certain things. We continue to, there's a lot of funders out there. So there is a trial and error piece of this that we're still experimenting with. So these are very much like lessons learned as of now. And as I said, we're still learning, we're still figuring this out. And I think, for our unrestricted fundraising, like a lot of that does stay in Jed, but we do see this work as like really core to what we're trying to achieve and core to supporting all other aspects of, our mission. So it feels very much, as I said, that anti-stigma work is really integrated into everything we do. And so when we're at school, we are bringing our Seize the Awkward assets with us. I mean, these things are integrated into different, it's very useful to us. It becomes part of our platform with other areas of our program. So.
Yeah, and I know we're going to talk. Oops, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, so I was going to say, thanks, Katherine. We do have questions coming in. So if that's all right, Jim, the first question is from Wendy Ingram at Dragonfly Mental Health. She says, how do you get connected to corporations? How do you know who to contact? How do you get a meeting to tell them your cause? How long does the onboarding from contract to grants grants given do you tend to see?
So I would say it really varies. And I think Jed has an advantage again of being a 23-year-old organization that we are well known. So we reach out to a lot of corporations, and a lot of corporations reach out to us, which I realize is like a really special, unique, lucky position to be in. And I think it's a function of being in this industry for 23 years. So the contacts at the right person at a corporation, it can vary. It could be some corporations have a foundation, some corporations it's really on someone on their brand team. I mean, this work with many of the corporations, the youth mental health messaging aligns with their brand messaging. And so it's a way for them to signal important things about their company to their constituents. There could be somebody on the social responsibility team. I would say it's not just one person you could potentially be reaching out to. There could be multiple people that could be receptive to learning. Jed we on our development team reach out to, look for existing proposal opportunities and respond to it, but we're also very proactive in just developing relationships with different organizations. So having intro conversations whenever we can, even if it's not clear exactly where is it going or what could this result in. So the more networking, just general networking and relationship building that you're able to do, that's very valuable. As I said, a lot of corporations now are reaching out to Jed. And I think that a part of that, again, it's the 23 years, and it's also investments that we have made in just being known. So we do a lot of networking and relationship building in the best way of just making sure that we know who's doing really good work in the space, and that they know us, and having a strong website, social media presence. We have a lot of people that go out and do a lot of speaking engagements, and then assets like Seize the Awkward. I mean, all of these are ways that different entities can get to see our work, see what we're about, and get to know us. So that's the who. Can you remind me of some of the other questions?
Yes. So how would you recommend getting a meeting with a contact to tell them about the cause, and how long does the onboarding process take roughly from contract to grants given?
So for getting a meeting, we do a lot of cold calling and cold email, whether it's through LinkedIn or you got someone's email address. So if there's a specific opportunity, of course, we will submit a proposal or a letter of interest, whatever the case may be, to respond to something specific. And then when it's not, and we're just being proactive, it's again, just figuring out if you're able to connect to someone on LinkedIn, figuring out if they will respond to your email, looking through your network, whether it's your board, other colleagues, just people in your universe in general that may be able to make a introduction and sort of help cultivate it. I will say we send many things out that don't get a response. I mean, that people don't reply back. So that is part of working in development or working in partnerships, is that you don't always get a response, but I think it's being really persistent. And I don't think I know of like the trick that gets the response every time, but I would say being really persistent. I'm doing a lot of research on the company and sort of saying from their perspective why you think your work may resonate and with them, why it may be helpful to them. I think companies, they are companies, and it is their brand. So thinking about it from their perspective, how does it help them? How does it help them build their brand in the way that they are trying to do so? And being very specific and compelling in making your case as succinctly as you can, whether again, it's by email or LinkedIn, or you get a call, you do get the opportunity to meet, really kind of putting your work in context of what you can see based on what they put out in the world that they're interested in is really important. And timing, it really varies. So there are partnerships we've had that move incredibly quickly, and they are ready, and they it's Suicide Awareness Month or Mental Health Awareness Month. There's a time sensitive thing, or they have a remit on their side. There's something internal in their calendar, in their schedule, and they are highly motivated, and things move really quickly. And then there are other times where it's a longer process of getting to know each other. And it can take, weeks to months, sometimes even more than months. I mean, I don't know that it's been more than a year, but like there are times where we have gone sort of around and around of sharing ideas with each other and really thinking through what could an effective partnership look like. So again, like I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. It can be quite quick, and it can, if there's interest in both parties, but it's hard to figure out exactly what should we do together. We've certainly been engaged in conversations that go on for quite a while. That takes us a while to arrive at something that we both feel really excited about.
Thanks, Katherine. And on a similar note, when starting from scratch, how would you suggest small and new nonprofits prioritize their fundraising efforts?
I guess by giving the 3 examples, it's really, I think one thing to think about is what is the match between the programmatic work you want to do and then the funder type for that work. So, as I said, like in just the 3 examples of the anti-stigma work that Jed is involved with, depending on the model, it sort of suggests a different type of funder. So part of it, I think, is thinking about for your nonprofit programmatically, what are your priorities? What do the programs look like? What impacts are you expecting? Like, again, to some, like, what are the time horizons? What are the impacts you expect to generate? How much data do you have on them? Some of that is it a regionally focused, based on what you are trying to do, it will could suggest a certain funder group that would be more likely or less likely to be interested. So I think it's sort of starting with on the program side, I would say, and then building out from there. And similarly, like starting with the friends of the organization and building out from there. I mean, Jed's, again, to our founders. So this is a family who lost their son, and in starting the organization, their inclination was to reach out to others and to connect. And they put together a board of subject matter experts. They also put together a board of friends and acquaintance and business partners who are willing to invest and support this work. And many of them remain really committed to our work to this day and have been incredibly important to the organization and getting us to the point where we can go out, cast a very wide net. So it's also, thinking about who are your early and close supporters, who will give you sort of the runway to develop your programs and to build your network, I would say. I hope that's helpful. I know it's a little vague. That's how Jed did it, I think. But I hope that's a helpful response.
Thanks, Katherine. And then this is specific to the Jed Foundation. Brian Armajo is wondering, will the Jed Foundation use storytelling to reach community involvement?
Yes, and I think we do use storytelling to reach community involvement. And I don't know if I can ask Brian, I don't know if it's possible, but by community involvement, I'm not exactly sure. If you can clarify by community involvement. I mean, storytelling is a major tactic that we do use, and we do try and engage people from diverse communities, like all communities all over the country, and be sharing stories. We are launching a major Center for Storytelling Excellence. We really believe in the power of storytelling and narratives, big and small, to really shift attitudes and behaviors on this issue. So we're investing heavily in it. And as I sort of shared with our, some of our storytelling programs, which is really the tip of the iceberg, and we're developing quite a bit more. It is both reaching storytellers who are very influential people with very large audiences, and it really makes a difference to the youth we serve, what they say and how they think about these issues, and engaging everyday people and making sure we have a wide variety of voices. And then, there are events that we do. I mean, those stories become part of our engagement tactics, whether it's on a college campus or in other places and communities, online and in the media and different channels that we're sharing those stories. So we do see that as a really important engagement tool.
Thank you. And Brian, if that was not the question you intended to ask, please feel free to type another question. We will be moving to Patrick and Courtney's presentation, but there will be time for more Q&A after they share. So keep the questions coming. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Katherine, for that. There's 3 things I'd like to reinforce that Katherine kind of mentioned to the assembled participants. One, I saw firsthand the power of, we all know the power of storytelling, but Jed did a particularly good job with it last night at their foundation by featuring two very poignant stories and using first person voice. And I cannot stress the importance enough of authentic storytelling being a leading element of your engagement with potential funders and stakeholders. Three things not to overlook though, and I wrote these down. One, the power of LinkedIn. Katherine mentioned it. It's a goofy tool. Not everybody really is aware of the mining that can be done in LinkedIn. So an interesting way to get into the door is through connections on LinkedIn. I'd encourage everyone to mine it deeply as much as you can. And then, knowing the funder's grant-making strategy, the homework that goes into kind of understanding what the grant maker is interested in the first place. And then the last point, the role of your board. This is a tricky thing, pushing them to be helping you with a give or a get. We've all been there. We all understand the power of it, but we also understand the nuances of interactions with board members. So I think it's one of those things that we need to press harder on. That's why people serve on boards. That's why they're involved. And the old give-get philosophy is alive and well to kind of build the funding fabric necessary to put together wonderful campaigns like the ones that Jed does on a regular basis. So Katherine, thank you. We're going to shift gears now and introduce our friends in Shatterproof, a very innovative organization kind of really focusing on substance use disorder and more. But we touched upon a couple of themes with Katherine's discussion, and our friends from Shatterproof, both Courtney and Patrick, we're going to touch upon a little bit around the evaluative framework aspect of this and more, the impact side of the coin. So I'm going to kick it over to, I think, Patrick. That's what we agreed on first. And Patrick Reedy, you're up, Shatterproof.
That's right. Great, Jim. Thanks. Great to be with you today. And we're honored to be part of the Huntsman Mental Health Foundation's efforts in whole as a part of this great community that you've convened. And Katherine, great to follow you again. It's been a pleasure to get to know more about the Jed Foundation and your great work. So we're pleased and honored to follow you. When Jim approached us with this opportunity to address this group, I'll be honest, we scratched our heads a little. The ask was to talk about campaign fundraising around stigma, and we've certainly got campaign fundraising experience. And as you'll hear from Courtney, we've got some wonderful expertise that we're very proud of in the stigma reduction space. But as Katherine referenced, we haven't quite cracked the nut on the work that I think we all have ahead of us, which is to how we can have a ongoing, focused, broad campaign around raising the resources that all of our organizations need to ultimately solve this problem. So that's why we took a collaborative approach. So I'll be talking a little bit more about the fundraising piece. And as Jim just referenced, Courtney will spend a little bit more time talking about more of the impact and evaluation of some of the work that we've done, which can be really compelling, I think, to funders. So I'll get us started with a quick overview of Shatterproof. I'll let Courtney jump in and she'll share in a little bit more detail our stigma reduction work, which she leads. And then, as I mentioned, we'll sort of spend the last half of our time allotted to talk about both the fundraising in general and a couple of strategies that have worked for me personally and for our organization. And then Courtney will follow with some of those stigma specific considerations around the work. Sound good, Courtney? Good, I'll jump in. So Shatterproof, similar to the Jed Foundation, was founded out of the loss of our founder, Gary Mendel, who lost his son almost 12 years ago now. He took time away from his very successful business career to do what he thought was going to be researching perhaps a board he could join, or perhaps a small nonprofit that he could establish to honor his son's legacy and do right by other families who were at risk of suffering the same loss due to substance use disorder and addiction. And so what he was shocked to find was a few things. First of all, the scale of the addiction crisis in our country, which everyone on this call, I'm sure, is well aware. The lack of a national nonprofit that serves the community that suffers with this disease state, unlike every other large disease state in our country, which has a large, well-funded national longstanding national nonprofit serving that community's needs. And what was most disheartening, I think, was found out that there was tens of billions of dollars of peer-reviewed research essentially sitting in medical journals, not being put into use. And so that compelled him to form what is now Shatterproof, and started that work a little bit over 10 years ago, and established the organization really with 3 pillars of work. One was improving access to the quality treatment that we know people living with substance use disorder need. Second would be education, educating both families and communities about addiction and resources that are available to them. And then the third, and I'm only listing it third because I'm going to kick it over to Courtney, but is the work that we do in our stigma reduction platform. I will say public policy really undergirds all of that, and that's been seminal to the organization's success since it began, working at both the state and the federal level. And that really culminated in the work that we were a part of. We're very proud to have been a part of a consortium of organizations and individuals who helped to pass the MATE Act, which required any medical professional seeking a DEA license to required 8 hours of training in substance use disorder, and that just passed back in December. So that gives you an example of one of the federal initiatives, but quite a bit of our work is also focused at the state level as well. So those are the 3 pillars plus policy. I'll just quickly summarize a little bit more about our treatment and education work. Our treatment work really began with the establishment of national standards of care, which then allowed us to develop our Atlas tool, which is a quality treatment locator originally launched in 6 states back in 2020, covering 14% of the country. And we're now in 11 states covering more than 40% of the country, and continuing to expand that reach. And then our education pillar is really intended, again, to be that curated source of information for people, first of all, wondering if they have a concern related to substance use disorder in their family or themselves, and then helping provide resources to begin that journey and navigate. And just one example of that work is our Just 5 program, which is an employer-based program which allows employers to provide this valuable information available at their will to their employees. And we are proud that we had 20,000 plus new users of that Just 5 platform in 2022 alone. And of course, we also have a website, shatterproof.org, and our Find Help section it can be a tremendous resource to people in need of that information as well. And then, as I mentioned, our third pillar is stigma reduction. For that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Courtney McKeon.
Thank you, Patrick. So in 2019, Shatterproof embarked on an extensive 12-month research process to better understand how behavior change movements such as HIV/AIDS, cancer, same-sex marriage had effectively reduced stigma. And from this research, we determined that there were strategies that could be effectively used to reduce the stigma of addiction. With these tools in hand, we created an evidence-based framework for a digital media campaign with the goal of reducing the public stigma of addiction. We kicked off our first campaign in Pennsylvania in 2020. The campaign leverages the collective impact model for scale and sustained impact in a state through the relationships with community-based organizations who are already doing the work. We conduct rigorous monitoring and evaluation to track progress and continually improve campaign strategy. We utilize a contact-based strategy through testimonials of those impacted by substance use disorder, and we rely on social media and digital influencers to disseminate our stories and educational content at scale. Since 2020, we've signed for an additional 3 years in Pennsylvania, and we've launched our Unshamed campaigns in Kentucky and California, and are in the process of launching an anti-stigma effort in Georgia. In addition to the work we're doing at the community level to reduce addiction-related stigma among the general public, Shatterproof has established and published the most comprehensive survey of addiction stigma ever fielded in 2021 in partnership with Indiana University. The purpose of this survey was to establish a baseline, measure progress, and hold our nation accountable to reducing the stigma of addiction through evidence-based interventions. It was from the Shatterproof Addiction Stigma Index, also known as the SASI, that we confirmed the harsh truth that medical professionals sometimes hold higher levels of stigma than the general public. This research was a catalyst for Shatterproof to invest in stigma reduction efforts in the healthcare sector. We are currently wrapping up a feasibility study in Pennsylvania to better understand the efficacy of different modalities of training for healthcare professionals. And additionally, in early 2022, we received a multi-year grant opportunity from Elevance Health Foundation to develop a culturally competent curriculum that would educate on substance use disorder. And we are currently in the curriculum development phase and will go to market later this year. Shatterproof's National Stigma Initiative has multiple funding streams, but our most prominent avenue to date has been through state government funding, which is really spearheaded by our policy department and lobbyists. I will pass it back over to Patrick to talk more about some fundraising tactics.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. So I have two to share with you, and I hope either or both may be helpful to you. Some of these may have already occurred to you, but I found them to be particularly effective, just generally speaking. And I think there are certain aspects of them that make them particularly helpful for stigma, which I think we've already identified has the stigma reduction work, right, has some headwinds anyway because of some of the topics we've already discussed. And so the first relates to what Jim shared earlier about tapping your board. And so I'll share, I have a visual aid if I can pop it up here. Is everyone able to see my screen? Great. So Jim is spot on, right? Typically as nonprofits, we're staffed lean and mean. And so we certainly spend most of the day thinking how we can tap into our personal networks. But the power of not only board, I would say anyone in your organization's orbit, that could be volunteers, that could be, frankly, community partners that you work with, that could be vendors or other contractors that you work with. I would encourage you to be as creative as possible as you think about this concept that I'm about to share. But I've just named it the power of your network. And I think it speaks to what Jim mentioned, right? I started my fundraising career in Chicago, and if I had a nickel for every time someone said, you know who we ought to approach is Oprah, right? So I call this the Oprah, the anti-Oprah list, right? By the way, if you can get a meeting with Oprah, take it. But I think that's a little bit narrow focus for the work that we have to do, which is frankly a numbers game. I think it was Wendy who asked the question, you know, who do you get in front of? Who's the best contact at a company? I would say it's the highest ranked person in that company, because the higher you get in, the more quickly you're going to learn the landscape and which of the different avenues that Katherine identified might be the best one for you based on your organization's work and that company's priorities. So I would encourage, and then basically this is not rocket science, right? I think fundraising is all about having the right story to tell, which I know each of you have, and the right people to tell it to. And that's what this exercise is all about. And you can see here, and I'm happy to share this. It comes up, this is 8 different categories, and you would give your board members and your other volunteers a blank sheet of paper just like this and ask them to fill it out with 5 names under each category. Everyone should be able to do this. Some people might find it a little easier than others, depending on the scope of their network. But the idea here is you end up with a list of 40 names from each person. So if you have 10 or 20, let's say, board members, volunteers, partners, right? You can see the multiplication effect here, and you would end up with potentially hundreds, if not thousands of names. And these could be names of individuals, corporations, foundations, right? You'd want to target this and give some parameters based on your organization's funding needs and the work that you do. And it's a no bad ideas type of list, right? You would start with saying, let's get this populated, and then we can sort of prioritize based on that. And then it's really having them tell their story, or I guess I should say your organization's story through them, right? I think that's the real power of storytelling, as Jim mentioned, in that first person. Here's why I care about this work. And have them approach the folks on this list that they think could help open doors and get those conversations started. It is a numbers game, so you'll want to share that with them, right? You'll walk away with 40 names, not 40 prospects, but 40 conversations that you can start, some percentage of which would certainly turn into a prospect, and then again, some percentage of that, right, ultimately pay out in terms of a grant or a partnership. And so I'm a big fan of this. I think it really makes fundraising a team sport, which I think it is, and I think it also it's fun because you'll get some wins early on, and it gets people really excited to sort of have the next conversation, especially if fundraising is new to them, which we all know some board members, are relatively new with this type of work. So depending on the expectations you've set up for your board, this may or may not align with those, right? So I recognize this might be new work for them, but I found folks to be pretty receptive to it, and it makes fundraising a we challenge and opportunity instead of a you. And by that, I mean staff, right? It should be a staff volunteer partnership if done well. So that's the first example that I wanted to share. The second example is actually one that we have applied to our stigma reduction fundraising here at Shatterproof. This was in place before I arrived, so I take no credit for it, but one of our donors cares particularly about our stigma reduction work. And so for the last several years, he has issued a match through which he will give us $350,000 a year, very generous grant, if we can raise an additional $350,000 annually to support specifically to support our stigma work. And so just quickly, there's lots of nuances to this. You can do it in lots of different ways, but essentially it's finding that seed funder, in this case, this gentleman who's willing to put up those dollars to encourage others. And then it's finding those fulfillment dollars. And you'd want to set up parameters in partnership with that seed funder to determine, size of gift and timeline and all those things. But essentially it really gives you a 2-for-1 in that you can make that original seed funder feel really, really good that they are able to leverage other giving to an area that they care a lot about. And frankly, the other bonus is it lets you have a time sensitive, urgent reason to get in front of some other donors who perhaps may not have given at that level, but could, and really create that sense of urgency to be able to meet that, whatever the timeline might be. In this case, we're required to raise that money by December 1st each year. So it gives us an opportunity before year end. Our year end, fiscal year end is December 31st, right? So through the summer and fall, to be able to get people thinking about that and ask them to help us meet that generous grant. So that gives you just a couple of examples, but now I'd like to turn it back over to Courtney, who's going to share some of the really good work, really excellent work that she and her team have done that I think adds an extra element of telling the story of impact to the fundraising that we can do around stigma reduction. So Courtney?
Perfect. So stigma is a barrier to effective fundraising for anti-stigma initiatives. And what do I mean by that, right? So like Patrick just mentioned, leveraging your board and your own network as a way to expand potential fundraising reach for your mission. But in the case of substance use disorder or even mental health, there's so much stigma, people might be cautious to too closely associate themselves with the cause for fear of what others might think. So this is where we can use effective stigma reduction strategies that we use in our campaigns. And as Katherine mentioned, they use at the Jed Foundation as a mechanism to reduce stigma among our potential donor base, right? Organizations can help train their board members and friends how to effectively communicate why this cause is so important to them through stats or personal story, helping people tell their why is an effective way to reduce stigma at the grassroots and equip them with the talking points to help others understand why they should care. Second, stigma as a concept is complex. What is stigma? We've even had partners tell us, we don't want to use the messaging stigma. Can we swap that for prejudice or discrimination? Because the general public doesn't really know what stigma means, right? So what is stigma? And also, how do you measure progress against stigma reduction? What has worked really well for our work and something we encourage all organizations to do is collect the data. Through the use of the Shatterproof Addiction Stigma Index, using validated scales, we were able to measure a baseline of stigma in a state prior to an intervention, and then remeasure at 12 months, which enables us to go past social media impressions and towards real impact. So how much did we actually reduce stigma? At 12 months in our Unshame Kentucky campaign, we were able to provide evidence to the state that approximately 14% of Kentuckians who were exposed to our campaign endorsed 10% less public stigma, 9% less structural stigma, and 13% less stigma against medication for opioid use disorder when compared to individuals who had not seen the campaign. By having a way to measure our short to long-term intervention outcomes, we can articulate our return on investment to a donor, which really strengthens our ask for support. So be really clear on what your intervention is trying to achieve and determine how you will collect that data to prove efficacy. There are validated scales already out there, so your organization doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. Last but not least, as the grand challenge is utilizing a collective impact model and rallying us all together to move the needle on stigma of mental health and addiction without measuring progress, how will we ever know if we're getting to the finish line? On the topic of collective impact, we have worked with community-based organizations also to leverage resources and funding towards a common goal. An example of this is in our Kentucky work, we were able to partner with a local county health department who had grant funding to reduce anti-stigma messaging around substance use disorder. Instead of starting their own campaign, they partnered with us. They allowed us to utilize their billboard real estate as an extension of our campaign messaging. This is how we've increased the pot of funds for our campaigns without asking the state for more money. These community partnerships are critical to campaign scale and ultimately the success of our campaign and our intervention. That's all we've got over here, Jim.
Thank you so much, both of you. We have one question, and then I know we're close to time, so we'll see if another quick one comes in, and I might just turn it to Jim after this. But Wendy asked, for getting state and government grants, it can take a lot of time and expertise. Could you estimate how much money, including FTE and time to find and apply, you might need to start to get these grants? For example, it took a full-time employee at $50K and 18 months to land $500K in grants.
Sure. Yeah, great question, Wendy. So first of all, I would say it's definitely not one size fits all. I think there are quite a few variables, including how much of a running start you have at this, frankly, right? Someone coming in with a relatively new corporate and foundation grant initiative might require a little bit more ramp up time. We hired a very talented corporate and foundation grant writer about a year ago. She's a bit more senior. And her fundraising goal for the year is $1 million, but that's in addition to really important maintenance work. She worked closely with Courtney and her team, for example, on that Elevance Foundation grant that she spoke about earlier. So, right, she kind of came into some mature relationships that require that really great stewardship and maintenance. Obviously, we want to do right by that funder in the short term, and we also hope we can obtain renewed funding when the time comes for that. And then, as I mentioned, she's responsible for about another $1 million a year in finding new funding. Now, again, that may or may not be the right solution for your organization. We've been at this for about 10 years. We had some very mature projects that are ready to take to the market, if you will. And so I think that makes the lift a little bit easier for a senior grant foundation and gift officer as we've hired. I will say we're also having some really interesting conversations about hiring a state grant writer. That's sort of in progress, right, Courtney? Just because we do feel like we may be leaving money on the table there, and that's a very different skill set than the corporate and foundation grant position that we have currently. We also have a small major gift team of 2.5, including me. I'm the half that carry individual portfolios. So that just rounds out, I guess, the team here at Shatterproof that's going after those types of restricted gifts.
And I think what I would add to that is what Patrick said. It really depends. When we talked about running start, right? A lot of that was relationship building. Gary, prior to the National Stigma Initiative taking off, did a lot of policy work on his own for Shatterproof, and through that was able to create relationships within state governments that when we were ready to bring a program forward, he kind of had that goodwill within the state government. So I think that kind of goes back to leveraging your board and people in your network and who they might know. And maybe, I do a lot of that LinkedIn mining that Jim talked about, right? Seeing who knows who and where you can get that connection. And I've been really lucky to get a lot of at least informational calls through using LinkedIn as a tool for that. But to your question specifically, you said, state grants take a lot of time and a lot of money, and that's why we are talking right now about hiring for a position of that nature. The other thing that Shatterproof has to its advantage is our policy team. Our strategy in our policy department is to put about $50,000 into a lobbyist in a state. And what that looks like is they're building the relationships on our behalf. But the investment that you just spoke about and the timeline, Wendy, that sounds about right. It takes time and states move really slow. And the other thing is that they're usually year-to-year commitments. So it's something that we're having active conversations about. It's a great source of funding. It's a great model, but it's definitely the cycle never ends, right? As soon as you get going with the program, you're kind of starting the process all over again. So I think that's something to really think about as you think about whether that is the right funding strategy for your organization.
Well, thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Patrick. So one word, wow. I mean, I think we've actually accomplished our goal today early on by just such a wonderful, talented group of professionals from two organizations. So one thing I want to add for just for conversation's sake to what Courtney and Patrick touched upon, several roads can get you there. I've had to wrestle with whether to bring on a hire or whether to contract out a bit of grant writing. There's a couple of different options there. Contracting out at arm's length can be expensive, but it can also be quicker, and also with a set of skills that is very difficult to kind of pull from the unicorns that we're all looking for in terms of staff for our wonderful organization. So, I'd look at the outside world from a contracting perspective. Having many laps in this world at this, sometimes it may make sense for you to kind of touch the hands of those professionals who that is their sole function in life, to prospect and search for opportunities that are aligned with your organization, and then work as a writing team to bring them home, just as a suggestion. But I think we learned a lot today, and I know we're approaching the end. First person I want to thank is Rachel for being on the backside of all this. This doesn't happen without someone like Rachel in the background. And the second group I want to thank are the wonderful participants on the Zoom today. And third, our panelists. I want you to remember a couple things about the conversation that Courtney ran us through. One, stigma occurs in three basic domains. There's self, structural, and societal. And Courtney touched upon that. And we tend to think of it in one dimension, self. The stigma that I kind of exhibit associated with my own problems. But let's not forget, there are structural and societal barriers around stigma as well. And those are as attractive to funders as it is to kind of go in search of resources to combat stigma imposed by us ourselves. So I hope you've learned a lot. I certainly continue to learn every day from wonderful professionals like Katherine, Courtney, and Patrick, and all of you. I think as we go forward as a group together, my goal is to create a bit of a community of practice around these financial strategies, borrowing some more collective impact terminology. I think it's all great when we learn from one another. We allocate an hour every now and then to learning from one another. And I can't thank our panelists enough for their ability to kind of present themselves in a very transparent and very open and very conversational way today. So Rachel, I'll turn it over to you to close us down, but many, many thanks to all of you. And it's a pleasure to get to know you briefly. And I look forward to working with you here from the Huntsman Mental Health Foundation. So Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Just echoing Jim's gratitude to the presenters and Jim and the attendees and wonderful questions. So I think this was a great topic, and I appreciate all of the openness with the answers and the thoughtfulness with the questions. So thank you all so much.
Take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.